All right, what is up, ELA Blast Summer School people? It's Brother Patel here, trying to give you a little advice, a little help with how to take these reading signpost notes as you work through the novel Maniac Magee, which we started yesterday. So, here's what you're going to need. You're definitely going to need your 6 signpost bookmark, okay? So make sure that you download it from the class website. It looks like this. You can print it out. It lists all the signposts and what they are, so you can, look for them and use it as a reference as you read the story. So it doesn't just say, look for contrasts and contradictions. It actually tells you what that is. When a character does something that's the opposite of what you'd expect or contradicts their earlier behavior, stop and ask yourself, why would the character act or feel this way? So it not only has what the signpost is, but each one of these also has the anchor question for that signpost. You're also going to need your trusty notes, your 6 signpost notes, which I put on the class site, and it looks like this with 3 different columns. So here we're just going to write the page number and the signpost that we noticed. Here we're going to describe what's happening that made us say this signpost is being used. And here we're going to write our notes about what's going on. And just for a little bit of help, here's each signpost anchor question. So, okay, without further ado, let's dive right into the story, okay? Maniac Magee. So follow along with me and make sure you are looking for these 6 reading signposts as we go. So here we are, before the story. They say Maniac Magee was born in a dump. They say his stomach was a cereal box and his heart a sofa spring. They say he kept an 8-inch cockroach on a leash and that rats stood guard over him while he slept. They say if you knew he was coming and you sprinkled salt on the ground and he ran over it, within 2 or 3 blocks he would be as slow as everybody else. They say. So right here I'm going to stop because I've been looking for these signposts and I noticed that the author has said, they say, they say, they say, they say, again and again. So, if we're just referencing our signpost bookmark, when you notice something like a situation or a word, here it's a phrase, they say, being repeated, stop and ask yourself, why might the author bring this up again and again? So I'm going to go to my 6 signpost notes, okay? And right here I'm going to write the page number and the signpost that was spotted. So it's page 1, AA, it's the abbreviation for again and again. In the description, I'm just going to say the author repeats they say over and over. And then I want to stop and think about it for a minute because that's pretty easy to notice, but we want to do more than that. We want to think on a deeper level. So we want to look at the signpost answer question. So for again and again, that's the signpost, we want to ask ourselves, why might the author bring this up again and again? Why would the author say they say over and over again? So I've already done this ahead of time, so I'll just show you what I thought. I think that the author might do this to help build up the legend of Maniac Magee, because he talks about he's born in a dump, his stomach is a cereal box, he has an 8-inch cockroach, he must be fast because there's this myth about, if you sprinkle salt on the ground, he'll be as slow as everybody else, they say. So it's kind of like he's building up the legend or the myth of Maniac Magee right here. Okay, and then we go right back to the story and we keep reading. What's true? What's myth? It's hard to know. Finsterwald's gone now, yet even today you'll never find a kid sitting on the steps where he once lived. The Little League field is still there, and the band shell. Cobble's Corner still stands at the corner of Hector and Birch, and if you ask the man behind the counter, he'll take the clump of string out of a drawer and let you see it. So I haven't seen any signposts yet. In fact, I really don't know what the author is talking about yet. I don't know what the Little League field is just yet, or I don't know what Finsterwalds is. I don't know what Cobble's Corner or Hector Street is. So I'm going to keep reading because this is probably just background information. Grade school girls in 2 Mills still jump rope and chant, Maniac, Maniac, he's so cool. Maniac, Maniac, don't go to school. Runs all night, runs all right. Maniac, Maniac, kissed a bull. And sometimes the girl holding one end of the rope is from the west side of Hector, and the girl on the other end is from the east side. And if you're looking for Maniac Magee's legacy or monument, that's as good as any, even if it wasn't really a bull. But that's okay, because the history of a kid is 1 part fact, 2 parts legend, and 3 parts snowball. And if you want to know what it was like back when Maniac Magee roamed these parts, well, just run your hand under your movie seat and be very, very careful not to let the facts get mixed up with the truth. So at this point, I haven't really seen any other signpost that the author is trying to clue me in on. I don't see any contrasts or contradictions because we don't actually see the characters interacting or doing stuff yet. There's no aha moments here where a character finally realizes or understands something. There's no real tough questions being asked. There's no words of the wiser. There's no more again and again, or definitely no memory moments. So if that's the case, you just keep on reading. So here we go. Part 1 of the story. So chapter 1, and look at it, it's on page 5. We're flying through this book already. Maniac Magee was not born in a dump. He was born in a house, a pretty ordinary house, right across the river from here in Bridgeport. And he had regular parents, a mother and a father. But not for long. One day his parents left him with a sitter and took the P&W high-speed trolley into the city. On the way back home, they were on board when the P&W had its famous crash, when the motorman was drunk and took the high trestle over Schuylkill River at 60 miles an hour, and the whole caboodle took a swan dive into the water. And just like that, Maniac was an orphan. He was 3 years old. Of course, to be accurate, he wasn't really Maniac then. He was Jeffrey Lionel Magee. So, I mean, how terrible would that be that your parents are killed when you're just 3 from a trolley accident? Little Jeffrey was shipped off to his nearest relatives, Aunt Dot and Uncle Dan. They lived in Hollidaysburg in the western part of Pennsylvania. Aunt Dot and Uncle Dan hated each other, but because they were strict Catholics, they wouldn't get a divorce. Around the time Jeffrey arrived, they stopped talking to each other. Then they stopped sharing. So again, don't just listen to the story. Don't just read along. Make sure that you're looking for these signposts as we go. I was about to write down that, 2 people hating each other, is a signpost. That's a contrast and a contradiction because I expect 2 people who are married to get along, to love each other. But the contrast was answered right away. They were religious, so they didn't get a divorce. So let's keep reading here. Pretty soon there were 2 of everything in the house. 2 bathrooms, 2 TVs, 2 refrigerators, 2 toasters. And if it were possible, they would have had 2 Jeffreys. Okay, so here I'm going to stop, okay, because I hope you've been paying attention. The signpost that I see is again and again. I keep seeing this. There's 2 of this, there's 2 of that, 2 toasters, 2 fridges. They would have had 2 Jeffreys. So I want to go to my notes because I stopped, I noted, and I noticed something. So right here, I'm going to write the page number, and I saw again and again, so I write AA. The description of what's happening, that's pretty basic. The author repeats there's 2 of over and over again. And now I want to go up to the signpost anchor question. So why might the author bring this up again and again? So I did a little thinking ahead of time, and I think the author brought this up to show just how much Aunt Dot and Uncle Dan really can't stand each other. And then I did a little more thinking, and I mean, think about how hard it must be for Jeffrey growing up in that environment. How impossible that would be that your guardians here, your aunt and your uncle, they have 2 of everything. They have 2 toasters, for crying out loud. They can't even toast their bread in the same toaster. They have to have 2 different toasters. That's how much they can't stand each other. So think about how hard that must be to live in that type of house. Okay, let's keep reading. As it was, they split him up as best they could. For instance, he would eat dinner with Aunt Dot on Monday, with Uncle Dan on Tuesday, and so on. 8 years of that. Then came the night of the spring musical at Jeffrey's school. He was in the chorus. There was only 1 show in 1 auditorium, so Aunt Dot and Uncle Dan were forced to share at least that much. Aunt Dot sat on one side, Uncle Dan on the other. Jeffrey probably started screaming from the start of the song, which was Talk to the Animals, but nobody knew it because he was drowned out by all the other voices. Okay, I'm going to stop because I noted and I noticed something. Did you notice the signpost too? Say, yeah, absolutely. Like I noticed this is a contrast and a contradiction because the character did something that I wouldn't expect. Okay? Jeffrey, in this case, he's screaming when he's supposed to be singing this song. So that's something that the author's trying to tell us something here. So I go to my notes. I'm just going to say write down page 6. I noticed a contrast and contradiction, so I put a CC. What's happening in the story? Well, Jeffrey is screaming during a song when he's supposed to be singing. And now I go up here. Why would the character act or feel this way? So why would Jeffrey act this way? Why would he be screaming when he's supposed to be singing? Now I think Jeffrey is just so frustrated that he can't take this situation anymore. He can't take being separated with Aunt Dot and Uncle Dan. They hate each other. They can't stand each other. They're separate all the time. They use 2 toasters for crying out loud. I mean, and Jeffrey just can't take it anymore. He's been putting up with it for 8 years. He's 11 years old. So that's why I think he's screaming in this situation. Let's go back to the story, find out what happens next. Then the music ended, and Jeffrey went right on screaming, his face bright red by now, his neck bulging. The music director faced the singers, frozen with his arms still raised. In the audience, faces began to change. There was a quick smatter of giggling by some people who figured out the screaming kid was some part of the show, some funny animal maybe. Then the giggling stopped, and eyes started to shift and heads started to turn because now everybody could see that this wasn't part of the show at all. That little Jeffrey Magee wasn't supposed to be up there on the risers, pointing to his aunt and uncle, bellowing out of the midst of the chorus, "Talk, talk, will you? Talk, talk, talk." Nobody knew it then, but it was the burst scream of a legend. And that's when the running started. 3 springy steps down from the risers, girls in pastel dresses screaming, the music director lunging, a leap from the stage, out the side door and into the starry, sweet onion grass smelling night. Never again to return to the house of 2 toasters. Never again to return to school. So I'm going to pause right here too. The end of a chapter is often a good place where authors use signposts because they want to communicate one last important thing to the reader. And sure enough, the author here did that. Did you notice a signpost? Say, I hope you could have noticed several. One, there's the again and again, because the author repeats this phrase, never again to return, never again to return. Maybe you thought there's an aha moment because all of a sudden Jeffrey decides to run away. Okay, so maybe you called that an aha moment where Jeffrey figured out that he can't take it anymore and he runs away, never to return to the house of 2 toasters or never again to return to school. Or maybe you thought that was a contrast and a contradiction because, a character doesn't normally act like this. An 11-year-old doesn't normally run away, never returning to the home, never returning to school. So whatever you found, you want to write it down in your notes, and you can write down, a couple if you find them. So sure enough, I wrote down on page 7 here, I saw an again, I did the wrong thing right there. There we go. On page 7, I saw again and again, and I called it an aha moment because Jeffrey realizes he can't do this anymore. So the author repeats never again to return as Jeffrey runs away. And so I want to ask myself, why would the author bring this up again and again? And how might this change things? How might Jeffrey run away change things? So here are my thoughts about this. I think it shows that we'll never hear about Aunt Dot and Uncle Dan again. And I think Jeffrey's going to have a real hard time moving forward because he's an 11-year-old without a home running away. So I hope that gives you a little sense of what to do if you missed yesterday's lesson together or something. So that's what you should do. Continue to read pages 8 through 21, and you'll be all caught up for Monday's work. And I'll see you tomorrow, y'all.